Hey friends, welcome back to the podcast with me, Jonathan Puddle. This is episode 135. Well, I have great news, good news, and bad news. I'll start with the bad news. Tryphena's not with us this episode. The good news is that Jonathan Martin is here instead. That's kind of backwards. I helped Jonathan co-host his show. I was with my good friend Jonathan Martin end of last year down in Indiana, and my visit overlapped a scheduled interview that he had with Brad Jersak, who many of you will know. I'm a huge fan of his work, and he's really informed my theology and my life a lot. And so I had the great pleasure of co-hosting an episode of the Zeitcast, Jonathan's show, as we interviewed Brad. So we all agreed we had such a great time doing that together that we are co-airing that interview with Brad. You'll find it on the Zeitcast and this episode right here on the podcast. So thrilled to make that happen. Now, Tryphena will be back with us. She's going to do a B-side with me on this interview, so don't worry, you'll get to hear her insights and thoughts again very soon. And the great news, I am starting some in-person live events. I am launching my brand new You Are Enough one-day seminars in Finland in May of this year. So if you live in Helsinki or Jyväskylä or anywhere near those, or you live maybe elsewhere in Northern Europe and you just want to come on out, well, then you should do that. I am going to be teaching from my book and new material that is not in the book. I've been reflecting a lot on how trauma impacts our spiritual life and how these bodies that we have won't allow us to get close to something that doesn't feel safe for us, even if that thing is God, which is amazing because God gave us these bodies. God values our safety. He values moving at our pace, and He is patient and kind and gentle. So I'll be teaching all that kind of stuff, and I would really love for you to consider coming out. You can find all the details at jonathanpuddle.com/seminar. I would love to see you there. All right, let's get into this interview with the one and only Dr. Bradley Jersak, all about faith after the Great Deconstruction.
I can't think of anybody whose theology has informed me more, and in that really wonderful way. And this is not like that, weird way when you're saying like your own theology is good or something. No, it's that way that Brad's always the person that this sort of deepest, most intuitive experiences of God that you don't have language for. It's like you write something. Whenever I hear you talking about, it's like, oh, that's it. That's the thing that I knew but didn't know how to put my finger on and couldn't have expressed. It's like you expressed with revelatory clarity. And so I really can't say enough about, beyond your friendship, just how much your work and your wisdom continue to impact my journey.
Well, I don't even know what to say. Thank you. How about that?
And I echo that exactly. That's the Brad Jersak experience for us. Oh, that's what that's called.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay, good.
Yes.
Now I can take a deep breath, and now I can keep going. And
I got to get you to tell my wife this. This is great.
Yes. Well, mutually on that point.
We'll happily write letters of recommendation.
And you do it with such humility, Brad.
Yes.
That's what I love is that you lay out this audaciously beautiful truth that resonates with every part of my soul, and then you tack on something like, or at least that's what makes sense to me. And I'm like, well, okay, then me too.
It's also not to just because the goal, Brad, is not to embarrass you, but one of the things I love when John, that's so true about Brad's voice being such a tender voice, not just wise, but tender. One of the things I find most interesting, and this has been true about the podcast we've done, because we've talked about big stuff, hell and judgment and atonement and, all the big ideas. I don't know anybody else who I feel like is able to talk about these things that also, of course, are deeply held beliefs of mine now, but where people are less defensive. It's like I feel like Brad is the person who gets the shields down. Like anybody else who's like to say some of the things that we talk about, folks are going to kind of like have dukes up. And with Brad, even if they're not even if they're not convinced, even if they're not sure, it's like, especially if they had some experience of Jesus, then it's like, I kind of recognize that voice. I don't know what to do with this.
And I think, I mean, we've both been reading your new book today, and I had a profound encounter with the Spirit, and part of the reason, I think, right off the bat, is you start this book, without any rah-rah cheerleading for deconstruction. Quite the opposite. You tell a devastating story about your life. And I mean, I saw myself in those pages, and I saw a lot of people I know in those pages, and the sacredness of like, this can be a horror. This can be a devastating experience, to have your faith foundation suddenly begin to crumble due to no action or fault of your own. And we can talk about this in so many different ways, as you lay out, right? Like we're going to come to a lot of different aspects of this, as you do in the book. But to start with this very sacred, stable, before we say anything, let's talk about the trauma and the pain of it.
Yeah.
And you didn't have to do that, I don't think, but you did. And it's a beautiful place to start.
Well, and I felt the need to, and also, part of it, Jonathan comes from here too, the tall Jonathan, where there are aspects where it was through a fault of my own, like my responses to the trauma around me caused trauma to others. And then I have to lay awake at night remembering those aspects and knowing that I've not, that there's harm done in these journeys too, and that I'm complicit in that. And it's like, but I would crawl in a hole and never say anything again. That would be safer. Except that I do feel an obligation to pay forward the mercy that was shown me.
Yeah.
That's my only qualification, actually, is that the people who came and walked with me were just so incredibly kind, and if I'll pay that forward until someone disqualifies me, I guess. But I did my best to disqualify me, so here we are.
Well, I love how you said that, Brad. I mean, because I think that's part of for me, is the power of this book, is that the D word, as you say, and I know we've had some conversations even in this space before, but about language, words that we use. Of course, I'm with you in terms of deconstruction has understandably at this point kind of become the catch-all word that people know generally what you mean when you say it. So, like, I like how you both parse that and critique that a bit, but also like, okay, yeah, we're starting from this premise of this journey of deconstruction. But I feel like it's so important, the work that you're doing here, in terms of the conversations about deconstruction so weirdly can become detached in the sense of like, I don't know, where like we're not being deconstructed. We're not taking ourselves apart. We're not like pulling those threads. So the way that you thread the needle in terms of talking about your own experience, experiencing harm, feeling responsibility, like all that stuff is part of what makes this so compelling, because it's like, it's so strange to me sometimes, even though I do it too, the way we can kind of cut ourselves, like our deep selves, off from this conversation where like it's like this very cerebral thing. So I love that the book starts in a very rawly personal way.
Yeah, there's you do have this spectrum, right? So I've been thinking about it that way. On one end of the spectrum, I did experience what we've called deconstruction and other things as liberation, as enlightenment, as growing up, as maturity. So like the good parts of it, I really get that. And I talk to people who are like, why are you so hard on deconstruction? This is the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I'm like, I know exactly what you mean. But I also know the other end of the spectrum where I didn't choose it. I underwent it. And others who are undergoing it don't need cheerleaders. They need someone to put an arm around them and show some empathy, because, the deconstructionist movement can sometimes be like a spotter in a gym saying, yes, you can do it. You can do it. And meanwhile, there's the poor guy or woman is like, actually, this is not a bench press. This is a steamroller. And I don't know why I'm alive anymore. So So you've got the two ends, right? You've got the liberation side, and then you've got the trauma side. And then we've also got the voluntary part where I'm purposely letting go of stuff. And we've got the involuntary part where it's just hitting me like a brick in the head. And then we've got these kind of two responses to it, where you've got the hand-wringing pastors trying to herd their people back into the church or through a door they're never going to return through. But on the other hand, then you've got the deconstructionists who are a bit too happy-clappy for what I needed anyway. And well, all of that to say it's complex, because we're complex. And real people need to be heard a story at a time. And even their story, like mine, is going to include both angles, I think. Most people.
Okay, so this is also fascinating to me because it's deeply personal, and I resonate with everything you just said. Very, very much so, right? There's parts that felt like I'd chosen it, and parts that felt profoundly like I had not chosen it. Brian said to me on my show, last year, nobody wakes up in the morning and decides to have a crisis of faith,
right?
But you're also then teasing this out to a bigger thing, I think, because you're looking kind of across the whole landscape of Western faith, Western culture, and you coined this term, the Great Deconstruction.
Yeah.
Can you why and what are the factors that you're looking at? I agree with you, but I'm interested to hear what that comes from, where that lands.
Oh, that's a good question. So I guess there's a couple things going on there. Maybe the most obvious one is we do have these other eras where movements became so big, we called them great, right? So the Great Reformation or the Great Awakening. I suppose we didn't call the Enlightenment the Great Enlightenment, but it was the same sort. And so this has now, whatever is going on, it's now hit some kind of a threshold where I think it's fair to call it an era, fair to call it a movement, fair to call it a giant shift in, and even though it's like super complex and there's a lot of voices and so on, it's a thing, put it that way. And then what I've tried to do is, at one time, maybe I would have said, look, at deconstruction is specifically what Jacques Derrida was doing in the 60s, and that's not what we're doing. So what? And I'm like, what if I take the opposite approach and say, if we're talking about dismantling constructs, then that's a much bigger historical project that goes back to Moses and the golden calf. It goes back to Jesus and saying, you need to be born again. It goes back to the early church fathers who said that there is a God, that the reality of God is beyond every construct of God, and that these constructs are idols that get in your way. Then I think, from the Enlightenment on, we've got great critics of Christianity like Voltaire and Nietzsche, but we've also got great critics within Christianity of Christendom like Kierkegaard and Dostoevsky, and all of them are like these guides that we're like, oh, these are the experts who I employ for the book, because I think the biggest error we could make is doing this in a half-assed way.
Yeah.
If you just sort of play with it, and it gets left as a trendy new industry to write memes about, we're actually going to, we're going to undermine where we need to get to. And part of that, then, seeing this great deconstruction as the birth pains of something important, means that construction is a birth canal, and we must not get stuck in the birth canal.
Yeah.
And we have to ask, where is this going? And if this were only like stage 2 of a 7-stage journey, I would want some experts to tell me about that who have the 30,000 foot view.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm interested in the 7 sleepers in part 2 of my book, because they see the big picture in terms of like 200-year movements. And if we don't pause, at least to be mindful of what they noticed, then our little trendy deconstruction can end up just being like a kite that cut its string and now got devoured by a tree, and that's it. And frankly, that's the people I meet a lot, So I do know those who've been super liberated by letting go of toxic images of God. I hope I'm an agent of helping them do that. Yeah. But I also am the one that gets the notes from like DMs from the psych wards. Saying, I was a missionary, I was a pastor, I lost my church, I lost my family, I lost Jesus, I lost faith, and now I've even lost meaning. And I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, you need to, I don't know, have a living connection. How do I get that?
Yeah.
You mean you never had that? Of course you have that. Well, I don't, so the language that gets used a lot is bereft. I'm bereft. I'm like, okay, well, I think I better not be your answer man here, but I can at least say I'm hurting with you, and I'll take this seriously, even if you're just being accused of being a backslider, or if you're not a good testimony for the deconstruction movement, which is so incredibly evangelical in some ways still.
Indeed.
We've been talking about this all weekend, all week here.
Really? Do tell. Let me hear it from your end.
I think we've agreed that much of our conversation here must remain private for all of our future careers. But there's this, there's this shift where some folks that have become vocal in this space have just kind of, it really seems, swapped one form of fundamentalism for another.
Yes.
And, and we hesitate to even acknowledge that or talk about it. I was reading your words where, where Kierkegaard is fearlessly skewering everybody.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I am not fearlessly skewering everybody. I am fearful of the things to say on this subject because it feels like if I don't toe the right kind of public line about how great everything in deconstruction is, I get canceled, I get labeled in some way. But there seems to be a streak of unkindness, of nastiness in some of this space that that we're both sitting here going, well that's not it.
No, it's the same. It is the fundamentalist spirit still, isn't it? You can go from right to left or conservative to progressive, but if you're just, one example was one of our Twitter friends, he had done a survey of 3,000 Christians in both progressive and conservative churches. And he had laid out in the survey, he presented a few lines from the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5 about loving your enemies, about forgiveness. And in the conservative churches, it was something like, I'm quite sure I'm close on this, something like 72% of conservatives said, this sounds like you expect me to compromise with evil.
Wow.
The words of Jesus. And then the progressives were like 76%. This sounds like you're expecting me to be complicit with injustice. So these are active church-going Christians who on a scale of 3 out of 4 were wanted to retain some kind of retributive theology and practice. And so, my experience is that you can go from out of, just change sides without changing spirits. And that's a huge problem. And if the red letters are repulsive, then I don't, maybe Christianity's done or something, but Jesus isn't. He's the great deconstructor. Yeah.
Well, I have heard a number of pastors expressly preach against the words of Jesus. So, I've certainly kind of seen that. But I feel like, in general, Brad, I feel like part of the gift of this book, and I don't think I realized. I mean, again, in one way, we're talking about it all the time, but I don't think I've heard anybody quite do this the way that you're doing it here. To be able to say, deconstruction is not monolithic. The same thing is not happening to everybody everywhere, and there's all these strands to it. So on the one hand, have there been a very culturally conditioned oppressive rather than liberative kind of Christianity that some people are feeling and actually becoming set free from?
Yes.
Yes. Are some folks bitter and hurt and angry and kind of burning it down? Like, sure. But there's just so many different shades. It's so helpful for me the way that then you just nuance the deconstruction thing to where there's not this expectation that we're always talking about the same thing, because we're really not. And I don't think
Right.
I realized just how much my soul was craving some nuance in this conversation.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. It's because like on any given day, even in my own heart, it's like,
Yes.
wow, I feel like I'm a new man. And then the next day it's like, I just feel like a pile of crap, and
Yeah.
it's, well, what's
Yeah.
going on here? Right. And so to think that we could like define deconstruction as, like you called it, a monolithic kind of thing is, and maybe, um, the only solution to that really is to say, tell me your story. Tell me
Mm,
your story. And I can listen with a non-judgmental ear,
yeah.
um, including like to those who felt the need to leave. I have a chapter on believers with
Mm,
Leavers, where
mm,
the only faithful move was to get out of Dodge.
mm.
And I understand that. And I don't need them to be church members ever again,
Yeah.
frankly, but I do want them to move from alienation to communion, you know?
Yes. Mm. Oh, that's so good. Yeah, it feels like Brad. It's what, and yet I feel like on the continuum, it's like you're acknowledging all these different kinds of experiences. You talk about your own experience in such a vulnerable way. One of the things that I love so much about how you're able to do that is, especially where there's so much pain and trauma. What you're decidedly not saying in any way, is something I do worry about a little bit when everything's like how great deconstruction is. This idea that it's another uh, predetermined, another kind of Calvinism that says like, yeah, God ordained your pain and trauma to teach you a lesson. Like we don't want to do that. But
No.
I still think overall, like in the grand balance, I think if I'm curious if you think this statement is fair. I still feel like while acknowledging all the complexities, you generally acknowledge a kind of movement, a kind of initiative of the spirit in this deconstruction thing, where it's certainly much more a sense of there is an invitation for people to come into a richer, fuller experience of God and being human, as opposed to some version of this is the great falling away. People are losing their minds or whatever. I feel like it just the book keeps calling us back to the Spirit's initiative in the midst of all these things, without saying that the Spirit is somehow directly causing all of these painful realities.
Yeah, that's really good. Speaking, now look who's nuanced, right? Well done, man. That was because like, so just to echo back what I heard you say, it's like, so God is not about causing the trauma that we're experiencing, but he's in us, he's with us through the trauma in a
Mm,
redemptive way, that this is going somewhere if we'll go
mm,
with him.
mm,
And so that's why, they wouldn't let me have 3 subtitles, but one of them that I wanted was the necessity, the perils, and the possibilities of deconstruction. So I see it as necessity is basically here are the facts of life. It's not like God is making it necessary. It's just life. The necessities of life include deconstructive, reconstructive.
mm.
Let's use other words for a moment. Let's say Richard Rohr, he would talk about the disorientation, reorientation. That's just necessary in the same way breathing and eating and
Yeah.
taking a trip to the can is necessary. It's you don't there's not an option. You have to go through
Mm-hmm.
this. You have to go
Mm-hmm.
through this just as surely as you have to go through puberty or whatever,
Mm.
or death. But then I'm also saying, yeah, and there's perils to that, right? If you
Yeah.
are listening to the wrong voices, if you're getting If your trauma is becoming your identity,
Yeah.
if your journey is away from life and love and light, that's pretty perilous. That's bad. But what you're saying is the spirit's in this, and that's what I would call the possibility, or you've called the invitation, which is even a better word. I just wanted 3 P's because I'm an old Baptist. But the spirit is what? So what is the spirit inviting us to do? It's like the spirit's like a midwife in this birthing process, just saying like when to breathe, push, and I connected that a lot with, Valerie Carr's book, See No Stranger. She's this wonderful Sikh activist who is talking about a revolution of love. And she uses the same metaphor for, that the darkness that we even experience in this, and both personally and socially, because this isn't just an individual issue. She would say, well, the darkness of maybe a womb and not a tomb, or it could be either.
Yeah.
And that's why I think we actually do need to write about it a bit, if I have any agency in this,
Yes.
then I would love for it to be a womb that leads to new life. And it can be, and I'm seeing it for a lot of people. So that's a Holy Spirit move, in my opinion. That also means dethroning the way, like, let's say, white Christian nationalism, or these like false gods that are actually an embarrassment to faith. Those have to come down. But a lot of people, they're just trying to get through the day. So
sure. That's right. I'm wondering in some ways, Brad, and this is a really open-ended question. One I especially love being able to ask you, because I feel like you've been such a wise guide through all these issues for me. Sometimes what I wonder is, even though deconstruction exists on a continuum and includes any and all kinds of experiences and ways of processing, like for any of us, the ways we process pain and trauma, some responses might be more healthy, some might be less healthy. Okay. But I wonder if in some ways, if overall there is this sense of there is a movement of the spirit that is pushing us towards freedom, maybe in some really important ways. I do wonder if there's also this sense too. I think all the time about, in John, the whole perfect love cast out fear. But when so many of us have had a faith system that's so fear-based to the core, you take that out of us. And especially the further that goes, like I think a lot of times we don't know how to run without that. Okay, so maybe I don't believe the way I used to about eternal conscious torment and some of these things, and that's a needed shift. But now, why do I make decisions, or how do I make decisions about how to love my neighbor or have any kind of boundaries in my life at all that might be healthy? I think a lot of us really are struggling with, okay, maybe I feel liberated from something, but not really having the resources to know what to do now.
I've heard these stories about the Welsh revival, where all these rough men changed their ways, and since they were no longer cursing at their donkeys, the donkeys didn't understand what they were being asked to do anymore.
Wow.
Yeah.
and I feel that inside myself at times, where I'm like, oh, I don't feel stricken with a sense of my own disgustingness as much as I used to. Certainly stricken by my capacity to hurt others. Yes, that and I think I'm allowed to be honest about that, confess that.
Yeah.
But without this driving mechanism of fear, it's almost like agoraphobia. Like this field is too big and open.
It's exactly that. It's spiritual agoraphobia. That's such a good analogy. Like, what do I do with this open space? It's terrifying. What comes to mind right away is a passage from Brothers Karamazov that's called the Grand Inquisitor. And the other is Romans 6, verse 1. So, first of all, the Grand Inquisitor is a short story within a big novel about how a Grand Inquisitor during the Spanish Inquisition finds out Jesus is in town and has healed a little girl. And so he arrests him and he interrogates him. But the interrogation is really him just giving Jesus a lecture about how the freedom that Christ brought was, we can't handle it. And so that the church had to take into its own hands, saying yes to the three temptations of Satan in the wilderness. And he accuses Jesus of giving us an unmanageable freedom. And so the church now has had to say, no, we're going to operate like the kingdoms of this world, and we are going to use control and fear because that's what the market demands.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's worth just reading that section. It even sells it as its own short story, but it's unbelievable because it is then a critique of the church, right? Mm-hmm. But it's also able to distinguish Jesus from the church. And it's meant to invite the church to repent of those things. But he does identify a very real problem. Dostoevsky's so good at this. He will take characters who are opposed to his own personal views, and he will present them not as straw men, but the very strongest arguments. Well, then let's just shift to Romans 6, verse 1. Paul has been sharing this kind of grace, an agoraphobic level of grace in Christ, that whatever Adam has done to screw us over, Christ has undone. But then his opponents are going to object, and he tells us their objection. What, shall we then just sin that grace may abound? Because they don't know what else to do, right? Now I'm free, then I may as well just go do this and that. And I've heard pastors say that. It's like, if I didn't believe in eternal conscious torment, I would just go screw around. I would have affairs. I would do that. And they go through all the litany of hedonism that their heart's not been won. I'm like, you mean you need hell to behave, to be a good person? Like even humanists are better than that. So, but we've been, and so Paul says, so I'm not going to present an answer now, but I think Paul does in Romans 6, and it has something to do with, I'm not saying it's either live in terror or anything goes. I'm saying the grace I'm talking about is fearless, but it involves identifying with the death and resurrection of Jesus, identifying with metamorphosis, identifying with that kenosis and theosis, which is like I'm crucifying the demands of my ego, and I am now surrendering my life and will to the care of this loving God who's leading me somewhere. So we don't go from grace to anything goes. We go from, or fear to anything goes. We go from fear to a surrender to grace that is about death and resurrection. And that's why I do think we need to double down on deconstruction so we get all the way to death.
Wow. That's so powerful. I'm wondering, Brad, this is one of the things I really, it's funny. The kind of thing that I've thought of this a number of times. Like, I'd love to ask you about, but then having this conversation, even a couple of the examples that you use there, say like, and I've had this come up in a couple different ways now. So like that notion of the person who would say, which again, I get that. If I didn't have eternal conscious torment to believe in, then I would do X, Y, and Z. So that's very much what's in you to do. It's what you want to do, but there's this external restraint. It's the only reason you're not doing it. For me, somehow there's a link between something like that, or when we see people who are in a certain kind of fundamentalism where they're insiders and outsiders, good guys and bad guys, almost this, childish Western sort of white hats and black hats, like everything's just very binary, very black and white, like it's all like just extremely rigid. People change their minds entirely in terms of what they believe about God, what they believe about theology, and yet still it's insiders and outsiders. We know that we're in us because we have them on down the line. I think this whole deconstruction conversation keeps making me just wonder just how little what we ostensibly believe, what we think about God, what that has to do with almost anything. It's like we're discipled, we're formed in these ways that are like in our bones. And I wonder if in some ways, like where we shift on the continuum of how we think about God might not be as big as we thought. When maybe it's more like these habits, these practices, these ways that we live are much more determinative in like the people that we really are. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yeah. What do we really believe?
Yeah.
Yeah. And how do you know what I really believe? Well, it's not going to be a doctrinal statement I compose, which is another construct. It's going to be a way of being, and not just doctrinal constructs, but ideological ones. And that's where I'm thinking about, let's say, what needs to be one thing that needs to be deconstructed is the left-right spectrum itself. The whole spectrum is the world system that depends on us, them.
Yeah.
And so here's the hard question I think we need to spend some decades on. How do you transcend that spectrum but stay engaged?
Ooh.
Right? Because I can just like say, well, I'm not left or right. Yeah. I'm center. Well, no, you're still on the spectrum then. And
That's right.
And now you've got a new one called, the establishment versus the populace, or what? So, okay, if I can exit that spectrum and deconstruct it, well, I am deconstructing it when I identify it as a script of us thems all the way across that requires another.
Yeah.
Who I can exclude. But if I can come off of that, that still begs the question: how will I do justice in this world? If I follow Jesus to do that, I am going to coincidentally look like someone on the left or right at any given moment, but it's only a coincidence. Wow. Because sometimes Christ calls us to welcome strangers, and maybe the left is better at that. Or sometimes Christ calls us to advocate for a certain vulnerable group, and maybe the right is doing that somewhere, right? And you're on the right, you're on the left, and I'm like, well, geez, no, it's not about that. I'm a follower of Jesus, but I think what we're going to have to do is just say, as long as I stay engaged, people will mistake me for someone on the spectrum, and they will, and when they do, they'll give me a script. And when I fail to follow their script, they will stab me in the back. Yeah. And I see this all the time, right? And it's like, that's just how it is. And I guess that's the cruciform life. That's picking up your cross and following Jesus.
I'm thinking, the Son of Man came eating and drinking, and this is what you said. John in the wilderness, it's kind of like you people aren't happy either way.
Yeah, that's it. John came neither eating nor drinking. You said he had a demon, or whatever they said about him. And it was the piper, right?
Yes.
And that text, we probably need to return there, because we have concluded that my wife has led a congregation over a 9-month process to becoming a fully affirming congregation. What she's found out is that, like, on the one hand, there are some who just were not happy about it. And on the other hand, there's others who will never be happy about it. So, I get it. It's never good enough, is it? Nope. So just as faithfully as they can, they've actually really walked beautifully as a congregation and made it about, if Jesus is the center and this is his table, who's he inviting? Everyone. Okay, let's do that. And so it sounds crass, but they've successfully become an affirming congregation without blowing the church up. But they did it through the gospel rather than through ideology. And she's had to put some effort into ensuring that ideology doesn't co-opt the journey.
Wow.
One example of that I can give you would be, like, let's say she says, this will take 9 months for me to talk to everyone in the church about all their questions and concerns. And I'm going to take those 9 months. And she did. But there were some who would be like, smash the patriarchy. We just need to tell people what to do. And she's like, telling people what to do is the patriarchy, whether you have a penis or breast, like that's.
Yes.
and people got it. They did get it. They're like, oh, okay, so we're not going to just continue doing a top-down, my way or the highway thing, because that's the patriarchy. Oh,
Yeah.
so the means of getting there, they really were able to manage it. But boy, that took soul strength on her. I'm very proud of her, and I'm proud of her church because they went for it. It was great.
What you just said there, in terms of Eden's process being gospel centric and resisting ideology. I mean, I think that's exactly what you just identified as this. How do we do this faithful work without landing in these spectrums that these left and right camps that need to be deconstructed? Eden, then you just said Eden went and talked to everybody.
Yeah,
that is slow, intimate, communal work.
Yeah.
Do you think it can be done at scale, or does it have to be intimate and small?
Well, this raises a question about, like, does a church have to be done intimate and small so that you don't get to a size that requires structures that are intrinsically problematic?
Whoa.
So yeah, in her case, it looked like, and it was wild because it was during COVID. So she would be outside on our deck, one person at a time, one couple at a time. And also, she wasn't trying to coerce or convince anything. She would say, just talk. Tell me how you're feeling. What are your concerns? What are your questions? And she was like brutal in terms of not reacting to them. And she said almost all of them just talked themselves out of like a problem. And wow. She's like, and they're like, oh, thank you so much. You've really helped me. And all they did was work it through for themselves, but they needed a non-judgmental ear to hear.
Yeah.
And it was pretty funny, like how little she had to impose her will on anything. It was because imposing your will is the patriarchy. She has a nose for that, and it really helped. Her name's Eden, by the way, for those who don't know. So Eden Jersak and her friend Sarah Pickering, they're co-pastors at a church called The Bridge, and yeah, so they did it. I must say they probably spent several years just talking open table, talking inclusion. But then it's when they asked her if she'd like to come on staff, she said, only if I can start this 9-month process. Wow. And they're like unanimously went for it. And they maybe lost one couple, but could you do that in a church of 1,000? I don't know. Can you even have a church of 1,000? Is that a church? Is that, I suppose it is.
I think that's the question, though. Like, I think you're absolutely right to say that, to ask that. Yeah.
I'm so glad that you told that story, because it's such a concrete, real one, real lives, real relationships in a community.
Yep.
It makes me think of a move I really appreciate in the book when, later in the book, where you talk about Howard Thurman, kind of get into Black church witness in that way. That feels so important to me for this, many reasons, but this is a lot of it. I think we have to own the ways. And incidentally, I still don't think these ideas were like wrong or unimportant. When I think about the certain a tradition that's informed me, maybe best embodied and very powerful through people like Stanley Hauerwas, and I go down the line. But I think this notion of, the ways that the kingdom of God, the community of God, whatever language you want to use, is very different from the structures of the world. Like, all of that's like so important. But I feel like exactly where it's so important to tell the kind of stories like you just did about Eden and the church. When we talk about Howard Thurman, we think about the Black church in general in America, it is that there is a real temptation to, what you describe as kind of disengaging, like being above the fray. And in so many ways, I think for a lot of us in sort of various, just all kinds of white evangelical-ish, like I feel like that's often the move. It's like, so maybe we move beyond, fundamentalism like we have known it, but then it becomes this sort of like, well, we've withdrawn from these things altogether. And it seems like we need those voices and that counter witness that calls it, puts our feet to the fire. Like you actually don't get to escape the world. You got to live in it in some way. Like, what are you going to do with all this new information, right?
Yeah, and that, I mean, you can't help but stay engaged if you're in the world of those that Jesus chose to hang out with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll give an example of this. When I was a youth pastor, and we were part of something called Living in Faithful Evangelism with the Mennonites. So I had a reputation of hanging out with the church growth people, the evangelical wing of the Mennonites. They didn't seem to realize I had bought into the nonviolent activism. They kind of didn't trust that, especially so the local folks from Mennonite Central Committee, who I think are maybe among the best relief and development organizations in the world. They were worried about my influence a little bit. So they're like, we want you to come see what we're doing in Haiti and Jamaica. And I'm like, I would love to. I'm all in if I can take my wife. And they're like, well, okay. So we go down to Haiti, and we ended up in a situation where a local MCC, a Haitian national who worked as a community organizer with MCC, was taken while we were there, and he was hogtied and beaten very badly, and they were intending to kill him that night. So I went with our hosts, and we had to stand outside the shack where this little police station, where it was really military. It was thugs who'd become the military, right? And they said, we're going to kill him. And we heard a rumor that you could bribe them for maybe $200 and get someone free. And they're like, no, not in this case. We're going to get drunk and kill him tonight. That's what, they literally just told us that. And meanwhile, they did permanent damage to his hearing and things like this. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, I recognize then that when MCC in our conference was being accused of being political, and the evangelical wing really was part of that, the accusers, and they were saying, MCC, you need to just get on with the gospel and not get entangled politically. Well, here I'm standing in front of the police station, and these guys have M16s and had been trained in America, the School of the Americas, when it existed. And I just realized you don't even have a choice. I can either abandon the man, or I can stay here. Now, I don't want to sound like a hero in this. I was just along for the ride, and I was putting all my energy into not shitting myself. But the guy who was with me is saying, you're going to stand before Jesus Christ someday, and you're going to have to give an account of today, and you're going to have to give an account to your children of what you do. And meanwhile, the guy is like shaking, and he's got his machine gun. And I'm like, I think we could get killed here. Well, I suppose to some outsider that might have seemed like getting political, but engagement was either you turn from love or you stay and get in a place of risk. And so that really cleared a lot up for me in a few minutes there. By the way, we just saw a series of miracles in that case where the guy was finally released, and part of the miracle was the guts of the people I was with. But anyway, so, if I can just go retreat then to my suburban home, and I ignore the homeless down in my city, or if I turn off my responsibility to the immigrants and the refugees who are coming in, and if I just don't get involved in what's happening in the world, then okay, I suppose I could do that. But to stay engaged, you will probably look political. And so guys like Howard Thurman would look political. I'm like, no, that's the gospel. That's not even an offshoot of the gospel. Right. It's not a corollary of the gospel. It's following Jesus is that kind of engagement. It is engagement. So
until our kingdoms are the kingdom of our God, until our nations are the kingdom of our God, it's only going to be a matter of time, right? Until the gospel runs afoul of power structure.
Yeah, it's inevitable. Yeah. So I do want to mention something. I'm struggling today to remember a name. It's this wonderful woman who she was part of our a conversation I was at in New Orleans, and she's a really elder in the Black church. She's just a wonderful woman and activist. I feel like her name's Lisa. And she made this warning to me, and I think it caused all of our hearts to clench, because she said, if in your deconstruction, you walk away from the church as this nebulous thing because it's full of white nationalism and it's bigoted, without investigating the life and gospel that's happening in the Black church, then walking away is still an act of white nationalism. Yeah. I'm like, oh, wow. So to me, that was like super profound. And that's why I did ask Felicia Morel to help me work out. Because I'm like, when I think of Christianity or the church in America, I do tend to think about it as this self-disqualifying movement that I have no time for anymore. And then she comes along and says, so I guess the Black church doesn't exist, eh? Whoops. Yeah. I guess there's no good Christian leaders out there anymore. So I guess Howard Thurman doesn't count, does he? Or Beatrice King or whoever, right? And like, okay, that's a good point. And so I did start looking. That's what I'm talking about, out of the embers. I'm like, okay, something's burnt to the ground, but I see some live embers here that could actually be the beginnings of a real faith movement. Never mind the beginnings. For me, they never.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's right. Carry on.
No, I just wanted to affirm, like I saw that the event. Of course, I love Phil Johnso and that church and Lisa Sharon Harper. I think that was right.
That's it, Lisa Sharon Harper.
Yeah, like her stuff, because she has a riff in general that I found to be, and I feel like this can be abrasive for people who are used to thinking about deconstruction a certain way, but I think it's so helpful. This notion that, hey, okay, if the real Jesus, if the actual Jesus is in fact a brown-skinned man persecuted by the empire, you are conceding to white nationalism, you're conceding to white supremacy, that their version of Jesus is Jesus. You know, if you say, like, this is what Jesus is, and you walk away, you're accepting their definition of who Jesus is and what Jesus did. I find that to be an incredibly devastating and haunting point in critique.
We've just recorded with Lisa for my show, and it'll be up in a little bit. But I felt like I'd never even heard the gospel before until I heard it from her.
I know we're supposed to be promoting my book, but like, people have got to get her book, The Very Good Gospel: How Everything Wrong Can Be Made Right. That doesn't sound like someone who's despaired of faith or walked away from Jesus. And so if we're going to talk deconstruction, there she is. She's deconstructing something.
Yeah.
And I admire that so much. It's funny too, because up in Canada, we have the issue around the Indigenous people right now. My daughter-in-law is half Cree, and we've had this terrible, the residential school stuff. And while the church's involvement as agents of that genocide inexcusable, and they need to own it completely, there is a forgetfulness that the philosophy behind it was actually European progressivism.
That's right.
Where the same people who said Christianity is superstitious and we need to behead priests in guillotines in Paris, that ideology is the same one that said these indigenous people are backward and superstitious, and we need to rub their culture out in the name of progressivism.
Right.
And so I'm looking at that, and so what happens then is you've got some people. I feel like there's two camps. One camp is like, Jesus is a white European and he's bad, so let's go burn the churches down. Meanwhile, these First Nations people are the ones who built the churches and these churches because they identified Jesus with the brown Jesus of Galilee.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so that's an interesting dynamic that I cover at some point late in the book.
It's like that. Sorry, Brad.
Go ahead.
That truth telling, that the church needs to do in terms of its complicity historically in these things. There's room in that truth telling to say, oh, and also this was Antichrist through and through from the beginning.
Yes.
Not only did we do evil, we had no idea in whose name we thought we were doing it.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, it brings me back to, when I watch even in the last, 5-6 years, we've seen some of these kind of more celebrity type figures, worship leaders, well-known Christians walking away from the faith. And I've listened, sat down and listened to their stories and the God that they describe wanting to nothing to do with. And I'm like, you should have nothing to do with that God.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's funny too, because then the actual God is very much alive and well and at work, and there's light shining through. And I'm so proud of my friends down at, and I'm part of a 12-step group now since 2009. And, these guys are so fun because they half of them are ex-Christians. Of the ex-Christians, half are ex-pastors.
Wow.
And a few of them maybe have hung on to their faith, but some are like, well, I'm an agnostic now, I'm a heretic now, pagan now. These are words they use.
Yeah.
And then in the midst of it, they're like, but I'm like, well, then tell me about your higher power if he's not, who you thought he was. And they're like, well, he's loving, caring, relational, responsive, forgiving. I'm like, oh, I know that God. And they're like, and I don't know who or what he is anymore, but I know this. He's in me and he's bigger than me and he's here and he's transforming us. Well, talk about the humility of Jesus. If his J name has been so besmirched that people walk away from it, he's not walking away from them. And he's quite fine to be known as the light or love or life. And I'm so impressed with him that these folks are like, and you know what? When I act as if he's there or she's there or whatever it is there, that's how they talk. I'm being set free. So the liberation is still happening apart from their old construct because they didn't get rid of them. They got rid of a construct.
That's so wonderful, Brad. It makes me think about, because I feel like this is such a careful distinction, and I love that you are walking that line, even how you describe that. The language has shifted, but in reality, here are folks who very much are still in touch with a higher power of love, and God's not offended. They still think we get God's name wrong, that kind of thing. Something, though, I do feel like is that I've just been sitting with for a bit here. And, well, real quick story. A couple of weeks ago, I literally have never preached from this text before. I was preaching the lectionary text, like, well, that's how it goes. I need to preach the gospel text of lectionary, so we'll see what happens. And it's the story of the persistent widow and the unjust judge. And as I'm thinking about that story, I'm thinking about, in the last few years in Oklahoma, being in community with Madeline Jones, Julius Jones' mom, and Antoinetta's sister. Julius has been on death row in Oklahoma for over 20 years. I was thinking about how much Madeline, more than anybody I can think of, embodies that spirit of the persistent widow. She's the one who kept knocking and knocking and knocking. And it's so funny. There's this texture in the story, the judge is afraid of the woman. And there's a line where I think in Greek, more literally almost be like, he's afraid she's going to give him a black eye. Like he's intimidated because she's so persistent. And and what I've seen in Madeline's life and over 20 years, like not giving into despair, continued, something just kind of clicked in me, this idea that to despair, to relinquish hope altogether, sometimes I think really is a kind of privilege, where people who really are on the underside of a thing, like for Madeline, it would never be an option to give up hope for her son. It's just not something you can do. And I think sometimes And not saying that away with any jaggedness or condemnation, but I think some of us maybe can forget that there is a kind of luxury to being able to say, I'm just done with everything. I'm done with hope. Like indulge that kind of despair. Not everybody is able to do that.
Absolutely. Howard Thurman has I think a quote on I'm never surprised by evil. I'm a follower of Jesus, and it hit me because I am surprised by evil.
Yeah.
And I thought, what a privileged position I must have lived to not to be shocked and surprised when things go poorly, when injustice happens in the world. I was deeply humbled.
Yeah, that's a reality where we can turn the channel, right? And I can forget about how hard it is to if you're a person of color who has to assess every pub you go into as to whether you're safe, and I don't even have to think about that. But it is what it is. The reality is I'll go to bed tonight and I don't have to think about things that people in war-torn countries have to think about. But then I just better not make any assumptions, about being a good guy or something like that, or why,
Yes.
why I'm in this place of privilege. I do think there's a sense in which that's what Philippians 2 is about, that where, though being God in nature, Christ, where we use the word kenosis, emptied himself. I think it's sort of like he set aside privilege. And
though fully aware of his social location, Jesus set aside his privilege.
Yes. And he takes the form of a servant, but when it says the form, it's not saying, like, it's not a disguise. In fact, it's an unveiling of God as servant. But so form is a mode of being. It's not just a mask that he's slumming it to pretend something. Actually, he's unveiling the very nature of God as what
he's not culturally appropriating the guise of a slave to prove a theological point.
That's right. Yep.
Brad, I'm wondering if I love that so much. The maybe in terms of just bring a couple things full circle, and I feel like this is, as much as I love your theological work, your way of processing through these things. One of the places where I feel like you eat and that you do best. And I love that this happens so much through the book, which, by the way, I felt very ridiculous to go straight into praising the book so much and never actually say the name of the book is Out of the Embers, Faith After the Great Deconstruction. That seems worth saying. Should have done that a long time ago. I'll be plugging this in all kinds of different ways, but it's so important. But I love that throughout the book, whereas, yes, you're dealing with the academic stuff, the philosophical stuff. There's the memoir element in terms of your own story. I love how all throughout the book, you're weaving in stories of people that you know and conversations that are happening in real time, where people who are all over this continuum of this great deconstruction conversation, how they're experiencing pain, loss, hope. I would love, in whatever direction you want to go with this, just for you to, if you could tell us just a couple of stories right now that are especially pressing on you in terms of real people who are in the thick of this, and how maybe they're connecting with God, maybe they're finding meaning, working their way through this. Like, what are you seeing right now and hearing through these stories that's just really grabbing a hold of you?
So do you mean from the book or outside of the book? What's your... Okay. Yeah. So one that I mention in the book is this guy who had been he was a Christian. I think he was a pastor, but he was part of a multi-campus kind of mega church, and he had some profile in it. And I don't know why his deconstruction was so messy, and why for him it was a free fall, but he ended up in a pretty dire situation where, and one of the metaphors I use in the book is about like a mastectomy. My mom went through a mastectomy, and so cancer had to go for him in terms of spiritual. His spiritual tradition was cancerous, but he lost so much meaning that he was bereft. And it was funny because in the midst of that, when he no longer believed in Jesus at all, he he from crisis care and suicidal ideations, he cried out to God, but the word that came out was Jesus. And it shocked him that that's what came out of his mouth. And it reminded Jonathan, you'll know this really well. It reminded me of the U2 song, Jesus Help Us. It's a fucked up world, you know. and then the moment he cried out to Jesus, he heard back, and what he heard was my name. And it's not because I'm an expert on any of this stuff, but I think God just knew that if that guy reached out to me that day, I wouldn't ignore it, because I do ignore. Like, I get too many inquiries, right? But that day I didn't, and so now he is on a pathway of like, what is it to have a living connection? How can I have this? How can I have this? And my godfather said, just start with empathy and tell him you already have it. In fact, you called out to God and you used the name Jesus, and then you heard back from him. So you don't have to grope for living connection. It's you have identified it in your darkest place. And isn't that cool that he didn't have to dig himself out to a place of light in order to have an encounter with the living God? It's like in the abyss. That's where he met him. And I connect that with this Russian proverb I love so much because I've messed with it. The Russian proverb is when you think you've hit the bottom, you'll hear a knock from below. The way I've messed with it is I've said, and it's Jesus knocking. He will always be beneath us, undergirding us, even at the very, very bottom. And sometimes we just need to get to the very bottom.
Yeah.
So that'd be one example where I'm seeing a guy who lost everything, and then out of the embers, an important word to me, and this is inexplicable. It is inexplicable how he got there and how he is coming out of there. And also that it's not magical. This hasn't been tied off with a bow. This is going to be years of recovery if he does. But there was God. So that was cool. That'd be one example. The other example from the book that's precious to me. That this woman who contacted me. Her and her husband were moving from the UK to the Northeast, and she had very, very serious trauma. And she's just like, well, what do I do with this? And meanwhile, I'm writing about liberation at that moment, and she starts pinging me on the phone. And I'm just like, well, yeah, this is trauma. You need to get a therapist. And so maybe when you get over to America, get a therapist. And she's like, wouldn't drop it. And finally, I felt like God was speaking to me and saying, I want to touch her right now. Like, would you just tell her, turn to Jesus, tell him how you feel and see what he says. And then for the next few hours, she went into some kind of profound encounter with God that involved like, the trauma was shaking out of her body. Now, I would never say do that instead of trauma therapy. That got her to trauma therapy. But it was like a very real encounter of the living God. That's why I said earlier in the show, it's like, how do we facilitate a place where God is real to us? So for this guy who calls out to Jesus when he didn't even mean to, for this woman who had a sudden encounter with in body trauma just because like I impatiently told her to go ask Jesus. That's fascinating to me. I wish it wasn't so random. It doesn't even have to be. Maybe there are ways to orient ourselves towards that kind of mercy on purpose. I'm always worried about making technologies, though. That never goes well.
I mean, not to boil down the ocean, but I think this is the thing. God is either real and
Yeah.
present, or isn't. And we've been talking about this again the last couple of days. People are hungry and desperate for a genuine connection with God, with the divine love, with the light, with Jesus.
Yes.
I know you don't want to be overly prescriptive, and yes, it's personal. But if someone is listening and they're just desperate and they don't know what to do next, I mean, what would your few words of encouragement be, Brad?
Yeah, so I'll do two layers. So the most immediate layer is I just go into that kind of listening prayer where I close my eyes, I picture his face. Maybe I'm constructing it, but I bring my cares there and I say, Jesus, part of me feels this way. And then, as best you can, be brutally honest. Here's how I feel, even if it's like angry or sad or whatever. Psalm 6, Psalm 13. If you need words for it, those two Psalms will give you words. But if you know exactly what you're feeling, just tell him. And then give him the benefit of responding. And it really is that simple. If God is real and he's in you, if he says, cast all your cares on me because I care for you, call on me and I will answer you, then my experience is that he does. Now so that's one layer. The other layer is just, I know we're not all wired exactly that way. So at one point in the book, I talk about like, well, this needs to work for everyone. God will work with everyone if he's alive. And so I talk about the way of the via activa, that's the way of, if you meet God in the act of life, of reaching out to the poor, you can meet him there. I meet him with the addict. I meet him with the homeless. I meet him with the disabled all the time, easily, because he said so, Matthew 25, right? But there's also the via positiva. Maybe you love to read and listen to podcasts and think about God and talk about, you do know. Don't tell me what you've read about God. Tell me, I bet you if I pray with somebody, not I bet you, I know this is the case. If I just ask, God, would you remind them of the time when they actually met you? I've never met someone who hasn't. Atheist. I was in jail and my twin sister died. And it's the first time I ever prayed. And I felt like she was there with me. I'm like, okay, there you go. Third, via creativa, and that is some people that they're not going to really access this kind of living connection but then suddenly through art, through knitting, for goodness sake, through whatever creative output works for you, then do that, right? And then the via negativa, that's the negative way. That is, tell me what God isn't. God isn't angry. God isn't a mean father. God isn't a vengeful, punitive judge. And then what you're doing there is you're clearing the way. So these kind of ways of orienting, I think, at least set us up for the possibility that he's there. And at some point, I think it's not on us. I think God, like, I'll tell God this. This is not on us. This is on you. Yeah. So if you're real, I'll tell you what, you prove it. I'm not going to prove it. But here's what I'll bring to the table. I will watch for moments of grace. I have a fun one to tell you about. This is just very positive. I've been reading the Sikh scriptures, and they're beautiful. They're like Song of Solomon. They're about grace, that one glance of grace washes your sins away, that it's not about rituals and fasting and pilgrimages. It's about turning towards love. This is what's in the scriptures, right? So I'm buying something for my phone in the mall from a guy with a turban. And I start asking, like, do you have any services that are in English? You're like, no, we're singing our scriptures in our own language. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I said, because I've been reading translations and I'm loving it. And he's like, oh, what are you learning from your translation? and I said, well, I was reading about how our soul is like a bride to God, and God's the husband. I love that. That's like, That's what I believe. And he's like, oh, you're giving me goosebumps. And I'm like, what happened there? Oh, we had an exchange of grace. So when I'm talking about experiencing God, I'm usually thinking about what's happening in my heart when I pray at night. That's when God, I feel God. If my wife talks about it, 100% of her stories of encounters with God are in those engagements with other people. So that just, oh, we've got something for introverts, we've got something for extroverts. God's everywhere.
Wow.
So, so I got, boy, that was a long answer, but like, so if we will leave it to, if we'll orient ourselves towards the light, if we'll be attentive for moments of grace, and if we let God do his thing instead of prescribing how it has to look, this, I think, we'll see people making connections.
Amen.
Amen. Brad, it's so, well, yet again, what an incredibly powerful conversation. I think and it's such a gifting that you carry. And I love, because I think nothing here is prescriptive. There's not a one size fits all answer for anyone, but this nudge to call out to God, this nudge that God will meet us where we are. And I feel like one of the gifts that you most carry is just helping people to step into those moments. It just feels right and appropriate in whatever direction you want to go for this. And Jonathan, I love so much that you specifically framed this as for people who are feeling, because I feel like it's so present, that active disorientation, that sense of the whirlwind. I think we're all kind of in and out of. Brad, wherever you want to take this, I would just love it if you would take us into a moment of that kind of attentiveness, awareness, prayer, connection, however you want to do it. But maybe like for those who are listening right now, just to take us in that kind of moment where maybe to hear in that way, to see in that way, to feel in that way could be possible.
Yeah, for sure. I would love to do that. I did a listening prayer exercise one time previously. I'm going to come at this one a little different. I'm going to give you a quick backstory. A young woman came to a conference. It was a retreat we were doing, and she, the day she became a Christian, she was 14 years old. The day she became a Christian, her body fell apart into a kind of chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. That day, and she lost her entire youth to it. She was mostly bedridden from 14 years old to when I met her, she was about 21. And she was from Quebec, and she's like, uh, I don't even know what to do with this. And I'm like, I didn't know what to do with it either. So I said, but what I can do is I can probably hold your hand and cry with you. And so let's just do that. And so this will be a 2-part exercise. So the first part, this is what I did with her. And for those who are hurting today, I'm going to pray Psalm 6, and you're welcome to pray it with me, but I'll do it for you if you want. And this is for people who are in a place of desolation. Lord, do not rebuke me in your anger or discipline me in your wrath, because that's kind of what I expect. Have mercy on me, Lord, for I am faint. Heal me, Lord, for my bones are in agony. My soul is in deep anguish. How long, Lord? How long? Turn, Lord, and deliver me. Save me because of your unfailing love. Among the dead, no one proclaims your name. Who praises you from the grave? I am worn out from my groaning. All night long I flood my bed with weeping, and I drench my couch with tears. My eyes grow weak with sorrow. They fail because of all my foes. Away from me, all you who do evil, for the Lord has heard my weeping. The Lord has heard my cry for mercy. The Lord accepts my prayer. And all my enemies, depression, anxiety, panic, fear, shame, anguish, they will be overwhelmed. They will turn back and be put to shame. And now Psalm 13. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts? Day after day, I have sorrow in my heart. How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me. Answer me, Lord. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death, and I may as well. And my enemy will say, I have overcome them. My foes will rejoice that I fall. But you know what? I'm going to trust in your unfailing love. My heart is going to rejoice in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise because I just hope, maybe out of the ashes, you'll be good to me. Now, the second part of our exercise, I want you to think about kind of kneeling, sitting, whatever, even in despondency or defeat, at the foot of the cross, and we look at the one who is the cross-shaped God, who's the intersection of pure goodness and absolute affliction. And we look to that one and he says, I know. I know. And he didn't just suffer like us. He suffered what we suffered. He suffers what we suffered directly because our affliction nails us to his heart there on the cross. And out of his wounds, Lord, I pray that healing love would flow into my brothers and sisters today, anywhere they need it, where they've experienced trauma, where they've experienced abandonment, where they've experienced accusation, even in their deconstruction, that they've fallen into alienation. Anybody like that needs your touch today. Now we're going to do this will be interesting. Instead of him hanging on the cross, the one with those wounded hands comes to you now, and I ask that he'd lay his wounded hands on your heart and on your wounds, and that he would draw out the toxins of spiritual abuse, of disillusionment, of disappointment with God, and of every foul thing that's been associated in misrepresenting Jesus to you, and that he would pour in healing light into your heart, into your wounds, that he'd flush you fresh and clean from head to toe, body, soul, and spirit. And then maybe, just maybe, you could follow into his arms for a big hug. And I'm going to just leave people there in that hug. And maybe the others are feeling great today, but maybe you could do that vicariously for someone and hold their pain in trust for them because they can't even look at it yet. That's good intercession. Get a hug from Jesus for them. Amen. Amen. Well, if God is alive at all and answers any prayers, I think those ones matter to him. And I'll trust that.
Amen. Ooh. I can tell you, Jonathan, Martin, and I were very moist about the eyes. we were pretty much in tears at the end of that time with Brad. I really, as Jonathan and we said, can't recommend this book enough. Out of the Embers, Faith After the Great Deconstruction. You'll find it linked in the show notes. You'll find it in my Amazon store, amazon.com/shop/Jonathan Puddle. You'll find it wherever you find good books. Brad Jersak, Out of the Embers, Faith After the Great Deconstruction. Oh man, it's like, where do you go from here? Well, I'll tell you, practically, Tryphena and I will be back in a couple of weeks with a B-side to this interview, so we're gonna go a level deeper if we can. Also want to give a reminder about my seminars in Finland. If you live in Helsinki or Jyväskylä or nearby, please please consider joining me in May. The 6th of May, Helsinki, the 13th of May, Jyväskylä, and we will be practicing how to love ourselves, how to move towards ourselves in compassion, how to feel God's presence and His love, and appropriate it for ourselves. This is not like working for our salvation or earning God's love. God's love is there. But trauma, as Brad touched on, can hold us back from experiencing the fullness of God's love. So, join me in Finland. You can find out more on that at jonathanpuddle.com/seminar. It's also linked in the show notes, of course. And I want to give a shout out to Sarah and Marcus and Rhonda and Lana, who have all recently come on as patrons or increased their giving. I just want to give a huge shout out to all of those and to everybody else who supports me via Patreon. Thank you. Friends, if you want to underwrite this work, it means a lot to me. jonathanpuddle.com/support. You'll find a number of options there for ongoing support or for one-time gifts. And if you want to become a patron of the show, patreon.com/jonathanpuddle. Thank you so much for listening. Grace and peace to you.